Thank you, Gavin.
I mean, let's not start off on a bad footing then.
Exactly. All right, guys. I managed to go through one or two issues last night with Arthur that had questions, um, because obviously he had to do family shopping, etc., and we had a lot of issues to deal with. So I'm just going to do a very quick summary of yesterday because we didn't record anything, and since this is our first Mishna that we're recording within the book. It's going to be strange to go to 2B without going through 2A, but we're going to go through it very quickly. I'm just going to share the screen, and Lance had that good idea that when we're doing a Mishnah, it's a good idea to keep it on for the duration of that Mishnah at least. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. They've moved everything around here. Okay, so the
It
Mishnah,
hasn't come up yet. Okay, it's fine now.
is it up, guys? Okay.
It's up, it's
Yeah.
up, it's up.
Ketzad Ha'edim is the first chapter, and that deals with plotting or conspiring witnesses. The second chapter and third chapters of Makkot will deal with each accordingly. But in Shas, this is the first official dealing with Edim Zomimim, which are conspiring or plotting witnesses. Now, Arthur did remind me last night that we did deal with cases of conspiring witnesses within Bava Kama, because Bava Kama dealt with creditors and debtors, as well as issues of damages and injury. And in that particular case, you will have a situation where witnesses are plotting to have an innocent person convicted either of a charge of assault or alternatively of damages to property or of not paying back a debt when in fact he did pay back the debt. So in that case, it was dealt with. So uh, regarding Sanhedrin, it was also dealt with there with capital cases about convicting an innocent person to the death sentence. However, why do we place so much emphasis on Makot is because Makot is where officially it would seem to start. In other words, it's not a side point. It's a chapter that actually deals with Adam Zimmerman itself. It's not a side point if you happen to have witnesses caught um, um, plotting against another. So the Mishnah says, in what manner do witnesses become zomimim, which is conspiring witnesses? So it's bringing a particular case. If these conspiring witnesses said that we testify about this man who is a Cohen, that he is the son of a divorced woman or the son of a chulutza woman, whom a Cohen is forbidden to marry and whose child by them is a disqualified Cohen, they are in fact testifying that this person is a disqualified Cohen. So all we are saying is that a Cohen himself that has a illicit relationship does not lose his Cohen status. He might not be very welcome in an Orthodox shul. And who knows, if he gives enough money, he might even get an aliyah. But at any reasonably observant shul, he will certainly be ostracized and be a pariah and put into chayrim. But he doesn't lose his title of kahuna at all. The only result of that union of a forbidden match is that his children will be stripped of their kahuna. Okay. So we're saying, and Gavin quite rightly brought this point yesterday. So how do we know? Because I never had the Mishnah up as per Lance's suggestion for the full time. We were discussing it and we had to bring it up because it says if they are found to be Zomimim. So you could have a case where in fact this Cohen is found that his father, who was a Cohen, married a divorcee, at which case he would lose his Cohen status. But if it's a case where these two witnesses are found to be plotting, by a second set of witnesses saying that they couldn't have observed this particular incident. And do we say that if these false witnesses occur, if they are Kohanim themselves, do they lose their status of Kahuna? So it says, in the case the false witness is himself a Kohen, we do not penalize him by disqualifying him from Kahuna, as he intended to do to his victim. Rather, he suffers the penalty of 40 lashes, known as Malchus. Okay? So, in fact, I want to bring a couple of points based on this. Um, the first point I want to say is that how would this occur? Firstly, the claim, before we say that they're even conspiring witnesses, we used yesterday as an example of saying you would have a maybe a 19 or 20-year-old Cohen that joins the Bloemfontein Orthodox Shul, and he's doing the blessing over the three festivals for the community, and then two of the older guys in the community realized that they went to school with his parents. And they realized that although the father's a Cohen, that when they married the mother, this mother had already been married previously. So within this particular case, they would have to prove that they knew the previous husband, number one, or alternatively, have some sort of evidence as to the fact that she was already married, even if she didn't officially divorce the first husband, or some sort of evidence as to the fact that their relationship was illicit. And the reason why I use the generational gap as an example is it's the most plausible to see happening. But there are a myriad of examples. Now, uh, one of the questions that Kevin asked yesterday is, what's this issue of chulutza? So just hang on a second. Just guys, just hang on a sec. Am I pausing the screen or am I pausing the share?
Yeah, you pause the recording now. Took a
Yeah,
few
just
seconds,
hang on
but
a second.
no, it's still recording, Damon. It's still recording.
How's it? Good on you.
Wonder if we all shout, "Hi, Pam!" if you can't say hi.
I know, it's worth a try. I don't know. Was that her?
It sounded like her, but I'm not too sure.
Didn't hear properly.
Come, good girl. Come.
Damon,
And
you
the cat.
didn't pause the recording, eh? We tried to call you. You didn't come back.
Wonderful. I'm more editing. I can't wait. Just hang on. Okay, I didn't pause the recording at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
We did shout to you, but you
Now
had
just use
already
the
left.
screen. Guys,
Turn
just
to editing.
the screen. Okay. Is the screen back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Brendan, do you know what a chulutza is?
No, I don't.
Okay. So basically, when a man dies without children, his widow remains legally bound to his brothers to allow for one of them to marry her in a process called yibum. Okay?
Yes,
And
I
that's
remember that.
Deuteronomy, which is Devarim, chapter 25, verse 5 to 10. And you also find it in Tractate Yevamos in Shas. And the reason being is that what they try to do there is have an opportunity for the brother who was deceased to pass his seed on to his wife by having one of the brothers marry her and pass the family dynasty on for the DNA. Now, she wasn't forced to marry him. And if she wasn't attracted to any of the brothers, she could obviously refuse. The same thing if the brothers of any one of his brothers didn't want to marry her, they were free to marry somebody else. But then there's a process called chalitza, and a widow that's undergone this process called chalitza is known as a chulutza. Okay? So what it means is that there's a ceremony of removal of the shoe, where she removes a shoe. I don't know if he spits in it or if he doesn't. I haven't done Yevamos, but it's almost a procedure at which he says, "Listen, I'm not choosing you as my spouse." Does that make sense,
I
guys?
see.
Yeah, I think he
Yes,
does, but I have heard that before. I think it sounds right, right?
Yeah, somebody told me that it's not necessarily the case. I'm not sure. All I know is it's known. Chalitza is actually a Gemara term for removal of the shoe. So I don't know quite what the process is, but I think she removes her shoe and he has to gently spit in it. I don't mean greeny. I mean just a gentle spit, the case may be, and it allows her free to marry anybody else. But this is the thing: the widow who has undergone chalitza, who's now a chalutza, is similar to a divorcee. In what way? She's rabbinically forbidden to marry a Cohen. Okay. So a divorcee is biblically derisa forbidden to marry a Cohen. A chalitza process makes a chalutza rabbinically forbidden to marry a Cohen. So then your question is, perhaps, does that
She's a
mean,
widow.
yeah, no. Why does that have a similar sort of connotation to a divorcee as opposed to a widow? Because a Cohen can marry a widow, but he can't marry a divorcee. It's not her fault. She's never calling an end to the marriage. Or one of the brothers is just choosing not to actively marry her, but he's not married to her. Do you understand the question?
Okay, I think I know the answer to that, Damon. Maybe it's to do with the fact that the brothers are very similar or they're similar in things. So if she refuses them, it's like getting a divorce from
So
the family.
Arthur's onto the right track. Is that basically, is that if she finds something unappealing towards the brothers or the brothers towards her, it's as if she was married, in fact, to that DNA. And it's a breakaway because there's something repugnant within her when none of the brothers want to marry her. So therefore, to a certain extent, it is like a divorce because it would naturally transition, hang on, into marriage unless there was a particular process of removal of the shoe. In other words, that would be almost the equivalent of a divorce. It's almost an act of fait accompli. Guys, you were going to ask something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask something. What if she marries his brother, which is a Kohen, and he passes away? Can she then marry a Kohen from a different family?
So,
Yeah,
yes,
basically.
I think she might get a reputation of the Black Widow. I don't know who would be standing in line, especially if they both died eating a soup. They might certainly reject that. But on a serious halachic note, Brendan, I'd see no reason why there would be a problem for her to marry a Cohen. If he died, I don't foresee it being a problem. Gavin, do you know of any problem? You're an expert.
No, there wouldn't be a problem there. Right? But now I'm a Cohen, as you guys know, but some of you might not. And now what happens is when I date widows now, I have to find out if they're chalutzas or not. It's made it even more complicated for me now. Just saying, it's like an added thing that's been added to my plate.
Yeah.
I know it doesn't really happen, I think, in practice today so much, but I think it does happen behind the scenes, not physically, but it's kind of, I don't know. Do you know if it's still in practice or not? I think I once spoke
Definitely
to
not
Rabbi,
in
but
practice anymore.
it's not in practice, but they do something. No, they do something behind the scenes, but by default, they make it not that it doesn't have to transpire. I'll speak to Rabbi Badil. I'll come back to you.
Okay, so Gavin's right. It might be not in practice, and there's almost a default ritual. However,
No, it can't not be in practice. It's halakha, it's not Torah. It's not something you can just say, let's not keep this Torah command. It's something you've got to keep.
Lance, it's not true because if you look at Rabbi Gamliel, just let me just bring one point. Men could just hang on. I've got the snake with fur on the screen. Just give me 1 second. Just one thing, Lance. In the good old days, before 1,000 years ago, there was Rabbi Gamliel where men could marry more than one wife. There was also a case. This is halacha. There was also a case.
Yes, they still can. Sephardim still can. Ashkenazi, in theory, they can because there was somebody said they can't do it for a period of 400 years. That 400 years expired about 4 or 5 years ago. But Sephardim can still marry more than one wife. It's Torah. There was a minhag that says you can't, but not halakha that says you can't.
Yeah, but unfortunately, at a certain point, because at a certain point, minhag almost takes on the status of halacha, because I'd love you to go to Rabbi, I'd love to go to Rabbi Goldschmidt and say, listen, I want a couple of girls on the side, or one or two, or whatever. Technically, by the way, if a man has more another wife, it's not considered adultery. Um, but I don't know, halacha, it's changed. In the old days, there were more, apart from multiple matches, the conversion process was also a heck of a lot quicker. You could basically have a very quick process where a woman would go to the mikveh and agree to a conversion, and it would be very quick. So I don't know, Lance. The truth of it is,
I
I
think
know
I
much.
think the
I
only
don't know much about
difference
it.
the only difference is with chalitza. You still do chalitza, but it's not the woman isn't. I think she's almost coerced into doing it.
No, she's coerced because she's not allowed to marry one of the brothers, as far as I know. Are you saying that I don't foresee that she would have a
According to
problem.
halakha, she must, but in modern halakha, they don't want her to. So therefore, they'll coerce her to do the chalitza process.
But can she marry the brother if the brother and her in agreement, by the way, halachically? I don't know. I wonder.
I'm not sure if she can.
I don't know. Yeah, in fact, it's a good question. I have no idea. Um, so for just practical purposes, for this purpose, Lance, and this is the only purpose that I learned the application, is that because one of the brothers found her repugnant in a way, might be her personality, it might be her looks, but something in that they don't want to take on this obligation that is encouraged halachically in those times, she is seen as something deficient. In other words, why is a divorcee prohibited to a Cohen? Is basically there was something deficient in the personality of her or her husband in the relationship that caused the divorce.
An example, obviously, is with Yehuda and Tamar.
Yeah, yeah. That is an example. But what I'm saying is, for these purposes, the chalutza is forbidden only rabbinically, and a divorcee is derisa, biblically forbidden. But because the practical application is the same, they both have the same status in the Mishnah. Because Tosfot asked the question, guys, and he said if something is rabbinically prohibited compared to biblically prohibited, there shouldn't actually be a problem, because transgressing this, if it's not biblical and it's rabbinic, isn't subject to malchus. It's not subject to lashes, Lance. Only a biblically prohibited negative commandment broken is subject to lashes. Do you get what I'm saying? And if it's rabbinically prohibited, then it's not subject to lashes. So that's one of the questions that comes up. That if it's not subject to lashes, why would it be that the Eidim Zomimim get lashes? Do you hear the question?
Why
Lance?
is that rabbinic, not derisa?
So it's not derisa chalutza. It's not at all. Only divorcee is biblical.
Damon, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Do the brothers have to be single to marry her, or can they have multiple wives?
That's an excellent question. I suppose at the time, if you could have multiple wives, they would be eligible to marry her also. I have no idea. I'm assuming that
Today's
that's not
times, I can't imagine like having two wives today. I can hardly handle one.
listen, today's wives, you could hardly handle one, believe me. It's a very different set of circumstance, and they might have encouraged in those days that the single brother who didn't have a wife would marry her. But guys, let's just stick on the topic. The question that Tosfot asks is, why are the Eidim Zomimim subject to lashes if all they wanted to do was prove um, that his father married a chalutza, which is biblically prohibited, sorry, which is rabbinically prohibited and not biblical, because a reciprocal penalty would have to be biblically prohibited. You get the question, guys?
Yeah, no, I do.
Brendan, Lance, do you get the question? Kevin?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So this is the answer that's given, is that at the end of the day, if something has the same pragmatic consequence, it falls within the same category. So whether something is rabbinically prohibited or biblically prohibited, if it's got the same consequence of damage, it's still within the same practical consequence. So what did the false witness intend to do? They intended to strip this Cohen of his status by saying his father married a divorcee or a chalutza. Okay? So at the end of the day, this Mishnah answers two questions. The first one it says is that they get the 40 lashes. So what does that mean? Is that Lance asked a question yesterday to say, well, then where does that leave an Israelite? Can he not testify against a Cohen because he's not a Cohen and therefore he wouldn't be subject to the reciprocal penalty? Do you remember, Lance, you asked that? Lance, you remember you asked that?
I remember
Yes.
he asked.
So what we learned from this Mishnah was twofold, is that because he is not stripped of his Kohanic status, it means it's not subject just to a Kohen to testify. In other words, let me just show you this one thing in the Mishnah quickly, and then we can quickly move on from there, is that it says in the case where the false witness is himself a Cohen, we don't penalize him by disqualifying him from the Kohuna as he intended to do to his victim. Rather, he suffers the penalty of 40 lashes known as Makkos. So this teaches us two things. The first one is that a Yisrael or a Cohen can testify against a Cohen that his father, who was a Cohen, married a divorcee or chalutz and therefore should be stripped of his Cohen status. Okay? It's not just subject to a Yisrael, because generally hazama penalty is a reciprocal punishment. So the minute it converts to a penalty of 40 lashes, and he's not stripped of himself for being caught as an Eidim Zomimim, it means that any member of Israel can testify against this Cohen that he's not truly a Cohen, and as there is some skin in the game. He has something to lose. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So then you have a second question of Tosfos, and that is, in order, remember, Gavin, that 41st daf of Sanhedrin that basically turned around and said that basically a testimony that is not subject to the laws of Hazama is not called testimony. In other words, if there's no skin in the game and you don't have anything to lose, then you can't be a witness because you can damage somebody without consequence to yourself. Okay, so we are basically saying in this particular case, how can this be considered Eidim Zomimim, since they don't get the reciprocal punishment if they're Kohanim and stripped of the Kohen status? And B, does it suffice that there's skin in the game and there's a deterrent that if they're caught being plotting witnesses, they will actually lose out by being beaten half to death? And therefore that should be some deterrent, and that suffices for the law of Eidim Zomimim, even if it isn't the classical case of reciprocal punishment. Okay. All right. Now that we're on that same page, can we move on? Okay. Just going to read the rest of the Mishnah, and then we'll go into the questions within the Gemara. Okay. So, sorry guys, I think I'm just sharing the wrong screen. The cat's on the screen. Give me one sec.
No, it actually said Sanhedrin. I saw that.
Yeah, it's flip. The cat's opened up actually two.
Wasn't actually the wrong page only. It was also the wrong book. Just saying, it's quite extreme. All right, carry on.
Well, it is and it's not, because we're going to see where the basis is that
I know you're referring to it. I understand.
no. It's the Gemara is going to refer to it. Just hang on a sec. I've got this damn cat in the way. Give me a sec. Just hang on. So, obviously, the rest of the Mishnah talks about exile. I'm just going to have to read it. I can't access it. It basically said, if they said we testify about this man that he's liable to exile because he killed somebody accidentally, we don't say that this false witness should suffer exile in his place. So, even though this is what he intended to do to make his victim suffer, rather he suffers the penalty of 40 lashes. Okay, so now we've learned two cases. This false accusation against a Cohen's father who married a divorcee or a son of a chalutza, where they're trying to strip this Cohen of his status and they found to be zomamim. And a case where they found to be zomamim, where they wanted to have somebody exiled for killing somebody accidentally. In both cases, they don't suffer the reciprocal penalty. What do they suffer? The penalty of 40 lashes. So let's just quickly get straight into the Gemara. So the Gemara basically says that it says, look, seemingly the Mishnah should have stated the following. If this is the first case where it's brought up, the concept of Eidim Zomamim, and to be a Zomam means to get a reciprocal penalty, it should have stated in what manner do witnesses not become Zomamim. Since the Mishnah, guys, proceeds to define cases in which the false witnesses do not receive the penalty they sought to impose on the victim. In other words, the Gemara is basically saying, how can you turn around and say, listen, we're starting the case of Eidim Zomamim, and the first thing we do is we bring two cases where there's an exception to Eidim Zomamim. Surely the first point is to say, well, what fits within the classic definition of Eidim Zomamim? Let's learn cases of reciprocal punishment. And then afterwards, we learn the exceptional cases. How can you proceed with the exceptions instead of defining what the rules are? There's a second question the Gemara asks. It says, look, the very question of the Tana appears to be unnecessary. Why? Because the Mishnah is going to teach in the fifth daf the rules of Zomamim, where it says, but if a second set of witnesses said to the original witnesses, how can you testify about this event that you claim to have seen, when on that day you were with us in another place? So these original witnesses are established as Zomamim, and they're now subject to the reciprocal punishment. So what does this imply, guys? That the case of our Mishnah is not the case of Zomamim. Okay? Because since the later Mishnah teaches the mechanics, as well as the punishment of Zomamim witnesses, there's no reason for the Tana to pose this question here too. So in other words, what it's trying to say is by the time you get to the fifth daf of Makkos, it's saying, look, this is the mechanics of how the course case runs. There's a verdict given, but the judgment has not been executed or carried out yet. And therefore, the first set of witnesses were caught out after the victim was sentenced, where a second set said you couldn't have been there to witness that event because you were with us in a different place. Those are the mechanics. And what's the punishment? A reciprocal penalty of what they intended to do to the victim. So the Gemara is asking a second question. If the mechanics and the reciprocal punishment is going to be mentioned in the fifth daf, why are you mentioning in the first daf about that should they accuse somebody of accidentally killing somebody, they don't actually get sent to the city of exile, but they merely get 40 lashes? Do you hear the two questions, guys? Please ask me on them before we go through. Brendan, you hear the two questions?
Yes, I did.
Okay. If you want to give over the two questions, just so I see it's clear and everybody.
No, I didn't. Yeah, I went off. I had to come back on. You probably said that. Did you say
I
in
know,
like 10 seconds,
I
20
know, I
seconds
know
ago?
that you had to come back on. That's why I'm saying, what point did we leave you on?
About just trying to think. I'm a bit tired today, so just I'm just trying to that you were saying that
Nobody gets left behind.
Guys, I'm just off camera because I'm getting dressed for a wedding, so I don't want to have like anything on there.
Listen, we might get more views if you get dressed in front of the camera. Need as much views as you can
Okay,
get.
no problem. I'm putting it on.
You
Okay,
just
so
need to,
Nate, you ready?
put on some Krista Berg music, Patricia. Lance, you. Um,
Are you talking about the Zomamim? Um,
so we're saying that there's two questions the Gemara is asking, Kev, bottom line. The first question that it's saying is that, listen, you want to set the tone. If you're saying this is the first quintessential case of Adam Zomamim, and you want to set the tone that once the verdict is given, before sentence has been carried out, doesn't mean a death sentence. It just means could to either force them to hand over the money or to get lashed or whatever. The distance in time between the verdict and the execution of the verdict. When I use the word execution and executing, they're two different things. In other words, the carrying out of the verdict. In that period of time, if a certain set of witnesses says the first set were not there to witness it because they were with us at that same time in a different location, they get the reciprocal penalty. So since that is the classic case of Adam Zimmerman, the Gemara is saying, how can you start off with the first chapter of Adam Zimmerman when in fact it gives you the exceptions instead of the mechanisms of how it transpires? Why mentions the exception? Then the second question the Gemara asks is, since in the fifth daf we're going to mention about in this when you accuse somebody of an accidental killing, and you as a witness were caught to be a plotting witness, you should be going to the city of exile, and you're not, and you only get 40 lashes, just like when you accuse somebody of not being a Kohen because their father married a divorcee or chalutza, you should be, if you're a Kohen, stripped of your Kohen status and reciprocal punishment, but you're not. It's saying that why mention the exception instead of the rules, and why discuss at this point the sort of exceptions when the mechanics are discussed of how it works with verdict and carrying out of sentence and that in between phase in chapter 5. Why mix the order? That's what the Gemara is asking. So let's get to the point very quickly. I'd like to share something with you on my screen. Hopefully the cat hasn't killed this one. Just give me 1 second, guys. Tell me when Sanhedrin comes up.
Up.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's up.
So what the Gemara says is that, you see, we're making a mistake. When we actually looked at Sanhedrin in the Gemara, Gavin, it ended off on Chelek. I don't know if you remember that. Chelek, guys, deals with people's inheritance in the world to come and what's going to happen in the Messianic age. That's the last chapter of Sanhedrin. Okay?
Wonderful. Sure.
Yeah, so it's the world to come. Who doesn't receive it? Who gets it? When is the Mashiach era, etc. But before that, in chapter 10, it deals with crimes meted out, like capital punishment by strangulation, for example, right? So what happens is you're dealing with the case in chapter 10 where it mentions Adam Zomamim for testifying, an innocent person and his female counterpart of having an affair. And at that point, it's starting the subject. So why is it mentioned in Makkot? Well, there's a very, very simple reason. And that reason is originally, if you look at Lance at the Mishnayot, it doesn't have Chelek as the 11th chapter. It actually has got a slightly different order. So what happens is the last daf in Sanhedrin that starts this case of capital reciprocal punishment for a false testimony and talks about the daughter of a Cohen cohabiting with a normal Yisrael. And because they're two different death penalties, which death penalty do they get? It's now going to discuss the case of a Cohen as well, in the case of accusing a Cohen of not really being a Cohen because of the family lineage. So it goes from the subject of a bas Cohen having an adulterous affair accusation to somebody not really being a Cohen. So it actually cohesively joins from one to the other, and therefore the questions don't exist if you look at the order in the Mishnahs and the way Shas is set out today. That's what the Gemara is saying. Okay? So since we've got 2 minutes and 26 seconds left, we will discuss the case of a bas Cohen, etc. I just want to tell you something very quickly. The first chapter of Sanhedrin deals with a different level of courts because you've got, for example, small claims court, magistrate, Supreme Court, High Court. The same thing, you've got different courts of monetary transactions, capital cases, national-based cases, treason. That's the first chapter, and which cases each level of court jurisdiction provides over. Then the second chapter is you're talking about high priests and Jewish kings and how their involvement works in court proceedings. Civil suits are actually not only in Bava Kama, but they're also dealt with in that chapter as to acceptable witnesses and judges, etc. But Kevin, I want you to teach us quickly, and we'll go through that on Sunday.
Okay, how much time do we have?
About a minute and a half.
Okay, then I'll have to be very brief. I was going to say a bit more than I wanted to. I have to say less. Okay, so in this Parshat Lech Lecha, one of the incidences, Abraham and Lot acquired a lot of wealth, and wealth was measured in terms of livestock, sheep, goats, and others. And the land that they were on couldn't accommodate both of them. So they had a dispute, and Avram eventually had to ask Lot to move elsewhere. And he said to Lot, "You choose wherever you want to go." So Lot chose the most fertile territory, in which the place of Sodom was, and Avram didn't have an issue with that because Avram didn't want to have conflict. So the lesson we could glean from this is that rather don't, even if one is right, and maybe you'll be hard done by if someone else gets a better deal than me, for the sake of peace and no machloket, rather let go of things, and it's easier said than done. So